Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you may be in the world. My name is Sophia Arend, and I'm the Global Blockchain Business Council's Communications and Content Lead. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the GBBC and Global Digital Finance's Global Leaders Series. This is a weekly global town hall we host with policymakers and business leaders to hear their insights into their work, the state of the blockchain and digital asset industry, and current global affairs. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Brendon Howe, Vice President and General Manager of VMware's Blockchain Business, and GBBC CEO and GDF Board Director Sandra Rowe for a conversation and live audience Q&A on VMware Blockchain, the state of enterprise blockchain, and his journey to leading blockchain for a Fortune 100 company. Just briefly before we begin, I'd like to introduce Brendon. Brendon is an accomplished executive with 30 plus years of success in product strategy and general manager leadership across early stage to Fortune 500 companies. As Vice President and General Manager of VMware's blockchain business, he is focused on driving product and business strategy for this newly formed high-growth business for VMware. Prior to joining VMware, Brendon spent 13 years at NetApp in a variety of GM roles, ranging from the core network attached storage business to new emerging products, such as NetApp's first cloud services offering. And before that, he worked for a number of early stage startups in data storage and network technology areas. He also serves on the board of directors of Digital Asset Inc. and a number of other advisory board roles. We look forward to learning more about this today, and we welcome your questions at any point during today's conversation in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Without further ado, thank you, Brendon, for joining us, and I'll hand things off to Sandra.
Great. Well, thank you, Sophia, for that introduction. And Brendon, I have to say, special thank you to you for the dedication. You are out in the West Coast. It is super early morning your time. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Sandra. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And also, obviously, for VMware as a member and your support, we really appreciate it. Our audience today is going to really be interested in not only what VMware is doing, but also, Brendon, your journey as an executive. How did you get to where you got to? And I think just to level set, could you explain, because we do have a global audience, what is VMware, a bit about its offerings and how it began, and then obviously how your journey began as a tech executive, and maybe some of our audience may learn from the journey path that you've taken. So appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. There's plenty you can read up on about VMware. I hope it's not much of a secret. VMware's been a really successful company over the years. The short version of the history of VMware is the company pioneered really the whole evolution of virtualization as a means to simplify and gain great efficiency in how application environments were deployed, infrastructure. The early days of server virtualization in the lab was really the genesis of the technology, and the whole notion of a virtual machine that could be dynamically allocated and reallocated and moved to take advantage of idle capacity and ebbs and flows of demand and things like that was really the foundational technology. And it was done in such a way that it was, very easy and able to be widely deployed. So the company grew off that foundational basis point to really develop a whole set of products, portfolio of products that enable an enterprise to creatively think through how to manage the application and data environment within their communities, including the edge and remote sites, and including intrinsic security, and including hybrid cloud strategies and things along those lines. So VMware is a foundational technology in hundreds of thousands of enterprises out there today, and really provides a good basis for how we start thinking about blockchain as an extension to that technology basis. And if you think about an application environment being built on VMware, well, why wouldn't a decentralized app running on a blockchain technology fall straight into that category? So the logic of why we're in this discussion at that level makes sense. Of course, the technology pieces are very different, but that's a little bit of a history of VMware, the company.
Fantastic. Great. And obviously, you as a tech executive would be great to get your journey.
Yeah. Sure. I've got 30 plus years of experience leading product teams, but both engineering and go-to-market efforts. I grew up in the infrastructure space. Networking and storage and data management were really the areas I spent a lot of time on through that journey. and eventually grew up into the modern day world of things are deployed as services, things are deployed partly on customer premises, partly in the cloud, and technologies have to evolve that way. So I was fortunate to sort of ride through that whole transition of, fixed infrastructure turns dynamic, and is enabled through technologies like VMware. I actually ran in my early years at a company called NetApp. I ran the VMware integration group at NetApp. So I got a firsthand view of how these worlds come together.
Right.
And then ultimately had the experience of doing full cloud integration with the hyperscaler companies, and got a flavor for, the changing business models and the changing customer criteria when things are deployed as services. And I think that journey will play out in a lot of new ways as we start thinking about new waves of applications in the world of blockchain. That whole journey from a tightly controlled environment, centrally operated, into a fully cloud deployed consortium-based scenario seems like it's an obvious thing that's going to happen. And I think I can take a lot of those learnings here. The one thing I'd add about my background that really brought me to this opportunity of VMware is I've spent a lot of time through my career on emerging products in new lines of business, and having to really go figure out, is there something here, right? Is there a business model this company is going to be interested in? Is there really a market for this stuff?
Right.
And I was really attracted to the fact that VMware was so early in the journey of developing some foundational blockchain technology. And the real challenge in the role is, how do you figure out how VMware can be a meaningful player in an ecosystem that has a whole different origin, right? Dating back to cryptocurrency initiatives and totally open source oriented initiatives. What's VMware's role in that game, and how can I be part of that, was really what brought me here.
Amazing. And I think you hit the nail on the head about how does big tech actually evolve themselves to a blockchain world. I think that there's a lot for us to discuss related to that, but I'd love for you to just, the blockchain platform at VMware launched last year in November. So it's actually, on a relative basis, not too old, it's relatively new. Could you tell the audience a bit about the platform itself? How does it work, at a high level? Obviously, some of our folks are not technical. So if you could just give us the high level, and then we're going to talk about some of the projects that you guys are working on, which are really cool.
Sure. If you can bear with a little bit of a history, I'll give you some insight into how we got to where we are today, and then what we're doing about it at this point in time. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Love the backstories. Yes.
Good. I think the journey for VMware in this space started back in late 2016, early 2017. I wasn't at VMware at the time, but legend has it that Pat Gelsinger came back from the Davos conference and said, boy, oh boy, there's a lot of talk about blockchain. We got to go figure out what's going on here. And VMware started a research project back then within the office of the CTO in the research team to go and study the early work that was done in Byzantine fault-tolerant distributed computing back at MIT, dating back to the 1990s. And it was simply a way to build data replication models across distributed compute nodes, which is the genesis of a consensus within blockchain.
Right.
So the research team at VMware spent a couple of years figuring out how to bring enterprise scale, or maybe I'll just say scale, to the whole notion of Byzantine fault tolerance. If you could take the concept of a core group of distributed state compute nodes and bring scale to that environment, it seems like a logical building block for a consensus-oriented platform that could provide data consistency along with distributed trust and privacy models, right? It's the genesis of how you put together what we call an enterprise blockchain offering. Now, what does enterprise blockchain mean? I mean, everyone throws these terms around, but I think it's important to really understand what is that. Well, first, we view it as a data platform. And as such, it has to be application agnostic to the extent you can make it that. That's true of VMware's core products across the board. We're an application deployment platform, we're a data platform, and this would be no different. We have to think about ways where we can enable a variety of choices for smart contract platforms and application platforms to leverage a common VMware platform as a way to bring a broad reach into an enterprise initiatives, which are always going to be multiple applications, multiple use cases, things like that. The second thing is we wanted to bring scale to the equation in the form of scaling the data consistency models and scaling the privacy aspects of what this brings. And that's a hard problem, actually, because then you have to get into the scenarios of how do you handle thousands of transactions a second through a platform? How do you provide determinism? You know, it's one thing to say that you can pump all kinds of data through the platform. It's another thing to say that you need response times. If it's a clearinghouse settlement, you need overnight reconciliation window compliance. You have to perform at predictable levels. And that's actually a very hard engineering problem in the world of distributed state. So that's a second portion of the puzzle. I think the third portion of the puzzle comes down to the simplicity of deployment. You know, if we're in this discussion that says we're going to build a consortium built on blockchain technology for digital coin initiatives or for third-party marketplace offerings and things like that, you have to have a model that says if a client wants to join a consortium, it can be a quick click and download and deployment model. It can't be a custom configuration, nor can it be an open source set of collections that the customer is responsible for pulling together on their own, deploying in a compliant way on their own, and then managing on their own. There has to be a better way. And if you think about VMware's install base in the hundreds of thousands of customers, just imagine if we could make it easy enough where our install base are essentially consortium nodes ready to be turned on to a point where they can just use the infrastructure that's already there as part of a blockchain network, a community network, a client network that can participate in these types of business initiatives. That was a really important part of our value proposition. And then finally, how can we bring our core strengths to the table? Day two operations, monitoring, management, the ability to have global support. You know, I think in the world of these early blockchain deployments, there are a lot of large financial services institutions, you know, large insurance companies, large supply chain companies that are looking for trusted advisors. And who stands behind this stuff? It's great that it's open source. It's great that it's a community of users. All of that is really good. But at the end of the day, when something goes wrong, who do I call? Who can come in and help? And those four propositions, really, the whole notion of application agnostic as a data platform, the ability to bring scale across both data consistency and privacy, the ability to bring simplicity to a deployment, and then day two operations. Those were the tenets behind the hypothesis of, is there a game here for us in the enterprise blockchain space? And we still believe that that's the case. So that was a bit of the history of how we got to where we are today.
Right.
We announced this initiative back in 2018 at VMworld in the fall of 2018, and we open sourced the effort as part of Project Concord. You can find all the stuff online if you poke around on that. And we're big believers in having an open platform and having the ability to build a community of users. But really, you know, those things I described are actually hard things to build. To bring scale and determinism and simplicity of deployment are pretty difficult engineering projects. So we've been at it now for a few years, getting the product enterprise ready, or as Greg Lavender, my boss, says, bank grade capable.
Right.
We were able to release the initial product last year, as you mentioned.
Right.
So long lecture over. Where are we today? The product is in the market today. I would consider both us and even the enterprise blockchain space to be fairly early in the game, early innings maybe, to use a baseball analogy. But that said, we have a very robust and we're proud of the product that we have in the market today. The way I would characterize it, the initial implementation is deployed by the customer, managed by the customer. We do have plans to offer this as a SaaS model. That's in the works now.
Okay.
But customers today would deploy in the environment that they would prefer to deploy in, including managed cloud environments and things along those lines. We are built initially as a centrally operated environment. Our assumption in the first product is that a customer builds the use case that clients are interacting with. So it's It's modeled over the provision of allowing a customer to actually centrally manage the environment while adhering to strict privacy policies for things like sub-privacy transaction and things where not everyone can see everything. It's a robust data platform. We go to great extent to keep everything on chain, to administer longer term archival capabilities to not overload the infrastructure that it's running on, and have fairly unique reconfiguration and reconstruction scenarios in the event that something goes wrong, and inevitably things go wrong. And even though blockchain and the data consistency models provide a lot of interesting ways to tolerate failures and even malicious intent within the chain, there are scenarios where recoverability is a use case requirement. And we've gone to great pain to put those types of things into our product. And then maybe the last point about our first product, it's built, I mentioned application agnostic. Our first product is integrated with digital assets, DAML, execution engine, and DAML SDK. You always want to optimize the application experience, and we've chosen to partner with DA. We have mutual customers that are using both our products, and we've gone to great extent to do some really clever integration with DAML. And integration with DA as part of our version 1 platform.
That's fantastic. And for the audience, there's also a video with Yuval Ruz, the CEO of DA from last year in the Global Leader Series that you could also take a look at if you want to learn more about DAML. But going into the projects that you are also working with DA on, would love if you could just give us a couple areas where bright spots of projects. Some of them are financial services. Actually, a good number of them are financial services. Let's start with the projects that you've got related to ASX, Broadbridge, and also I'm going to ask you a bit about DM as well, DM Association, which hasn't quite launched yet, but that would be great for us to touch upon. But if you don't mind starting with Broadbridge and ASX, that Australian Stock Exchange, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I'll stay within bounds of what's public information, of course. The one thing I'll say about the Australian Securities Exchange, ASX, and Broadbridge Financial, both of these particular projects are fairly well-known public initiatives. The ASX project is a project called Chess Plus. It's a replacement of their existing Chess platform, which is their clearinghouse and settlement platform dating back to the 1980s. And I'll come back to that theme in a minute. But maybe start with the Australian Securities Exchange. They are, I think, a stereotypical example of a company that is looking to build the next generation of process and infrastructure within their environments to bring new business opportunities to the whole balance of how do you run the fundamentals of the exchange. So it's more than just upgrading a platform that was dated from 1980s to modern day. It's more about how do you modernize the environment to take advantage of multi-party transactions and ecosystems that are enabled now with technology that's available that simply weren't possible back then. So when you look at these kinds of environments, and this is not specific to ASX, there are some fundamental problems that I think exist across a lot of different companies. Data sharing is a very complex problem. And I know that from my years of work in networking and storage. You can look at it from the application. It doesn't matter what angle you look at it. It's a big, big problem, right? Data sets are inconsistent. Technology platforms are incompatible. You have constant reconciliation that you have to factor in. You have manual steps, every path, every step along the way to reconcile things. And all of that rolls up into time and inefficiency, time and cost, essentially, right? So it's not that surprising when you look at the reality of settlement in a lot of these environments. It takes days to complete, and it's because of all these steps along the way. So I think most companies out there are looking to streamline those processes to cut time out of the equation, but also to cut cost out of the equation. And ultimately, if you can enable more automation through that process and data sharing models so that you don't have to intervene every step of the way, you can unlock a lot of the power of what that data brings. That's sort of the story behind every customer case. The
Right.
Australian Securities Exchange is no different. I think what happened in the case of ASX, probably dating back 3 years ago, is they spent an extensive amount of time looking at technology and made the decision that a distributed ledger platform was the optimal way to solve that problem. And we were privileged to be part of that project, not quite that early, but we came in 2019 as a solutions partner with Digital Asset to help them solve that problem. So the initial phase of project is with the Chess Plus platform, but I think it's fair to say ASX has aspirations to take that distributed ledger platform far beyond just a replacement of their trading house or their clearinghouse settlement platform into business initiatives that are far more longer term reaching than just the initial use case. The other thing I'll say is those things I named about enterprise class platform attributes play out in spades when you think about the settlement process of the Securities Exchange of Australia. Needless to say, things have to perform, things have to be available, things have to be predictable. These are highly regulated environments. This is about as hard of a use case, I think, that you could potentially start with as is out there. But our view always has been, look, you take on the hard one and you solve that one, and you can apply that and leverage that technology in a lot of plays that bring competitive uniqueness and customer value in the market today. So that was always our view there. The Broadbridge Financial piece is a little bit different. It's based on their distributed ledger repo platform, DLR platform. And this is another one where you can go online and read plenty about it. But the theme is consistent here. It's a different use case, obviously, with repo processing, but consistent theme of trying to go from large batched multi-day operations to more immediate transaction reconciliation and processing, and therefore bring a lot or eliminate a lot of cost out of that equation. And they are very far along in the go live planning of the DLR platform, and we're thrilled to be part of that too. So I think those two are, in my mind, they're good examples. We're proud to have them as logos, if I could be selfish for a minute on that. But more importantly, I think they're really good examples of the strategic thinking behind a distributed ledger. This is more than just a crypto coin initiative. This is more than a proof of concept on what might be possible. These are very active, very deeply strategic projects at the core of the business behind these companies. And I think it speaks to me to the core value of the blockchain technology enabling a data sharing model, a distributed ledger model in ways that are going to be very powerful for a long time to come.
I appreciate you saying all of that and completely agree with you that enterprise blockchain has in many ways only just begun. And for those out there who think that enterprise blockchain is dead, I would ask them to probably have a rethink and do some more research, because underneath the iceberg of obvious public announcements, there is an absolute beehive of activity in the enterprise blockchain space. And frankly, what I'm finding interesting and would love to get your thoughts on this is there's actually transformation happening at some of the largest companies in the world that include financial services transformation within large corporates that maybe do fashion or do products, like actual physical products. And so the opportunity set for reorganizing your process, whatever business process, whatever it might be, whether it's actual supply chain or whether it's settlement and confirmation of certain pieces of data, there's a whole wave of activity going on. And that's just corporates.
Yep.
And then let's take that to governments.
Yep.
And there's a whole nother dimension there.
Agreed. In fact, one of the projects I'm most excited about is with a company called VMware. We're actually engaged with the chief financial officer in the Department of Treasury at VMware to build a platform that helps with quarterly payment settlement. Imagine every Fortune 500 company out there at quarter end, particularly the companies that have subsidiaries, they have OEM relationships, they have international business entities, and imagine the challenge of the Department of Treasury at quarter end to have to reconcile payment. It's an immense problem, and a lot of that is still done through blood, sweat, and tears and spreadsheets, right? And this is exactly an example of the point you're bringing up, but this applies to a lot of companies, not just a clearinghouse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think people should think about the financial services transformation inside of government and inside of corporates, big tech, just like yours. And that opportunity, it's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity set, and we've really only just begun.
Yep.
So appreciate, Brendon, you mentioning that and the work that you're doing with your own CFO, which is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about Diem, which is formerly known as Libra. How did you guys get involved in that project?
Yeah, it's actually the genesis goes back to the brief history lesson that I gave. I think the Diem project is the only other project that I've seen that's built on the Byzantine fault tolerant foundational aspect of it. There's common roots on that original project and how it branched out into both ourselves and what is ultimately Diem, the organization.
Right.
But it is the way I would associate it is it's a common technology approach to how we're building a Byzantine fault tolerant based consensus engine. The opportunity for the companies to work together remains to be seen. We'll see how that plays out, but it is as simple as the foundation technology has roots that cover both of our companies.
So one thing I know when people talk about the tipping point for enterprise blockchain adoption is the ability to scale. And that's something you've already addressed, and that's something VMware Blockchain can do, which is fantastic. Another dimension is security. Another dimension is privacy of certain confidential information, et cetera, et cetera. And what I think has been a challenge up until now, in the years leading up to where we are today, has been around how do all those ingredients come together to then really transform companies. And let's face it, if you're an established company and you're focusing on whatever it is that you build or sell, this is going to be another add-on top of all the other priorities you have, right? So from your perspective, as you're talking to your client base, how do you approach it? Is it more they've got problems and maybe a blockchain solution might make sense for them? Or is it more they're looking at wholesale transformation? So you approach it that way?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sandra. This is at the crux of us really studying the market and honestly figuring out what's the go-to-market motion here. We're a company, VMware. We historically have been an infrastructure value proposition. And there may be customers out there who spend their day saying, I have all this blockchain deployed. Boy, I'd like a better one. Come talk to me about a better blockchain. I've yet to meet that customer. I don't think we're at that stage yet.
Yeah.
Maybe we will be someday, but that's not the discussion today. I do think there's been plenty of companies that have started initiatives based on the topic. And I admire that. Companies are trying to be leading edge and they're looking at the technology saying, is there a way to leverage this? But those tend to yield a lot of proof of concept experiments, pilots.
Absolutely.
And this industry has been, I think, characterized by hundreds and hundreds of pilot projects. So from an initiative standpoint and creativity standpoint, fantastic. From a standpoint of building a business, dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Because you get caught up into being the master of every proof of concept out there, none of which go to production.
Right, exactly.
So what we found is, I think a lot of this discussion does not start at the technology level. It starts at the re-engineering of business processes level. It starts with the ASX and Broadbridge discussion of how do we drive time and cost out of our back office processes. And then you lead down a path of, well, what options are there for us to build systems that have this capability? It starts on the top and comes down. It usually doesn't start at the bottom and go up.
Right.
Now we can bridge those gaps. I think one of the unique value propositions that we bring to the table is there are a lot of tools and skills, a lot of our portfolio at VMware that lets customers leverage the environment they run today into that new world environment, so we can bridge that gap. And that's of great advantage to the customer. But I think most of the blockchain discussions today start at the business problem level and come down. And that explains why most of the engagements we have are with line of business owners or application owners. They're not with the VP of infrastructure, sometimes with the CIO, but usually with the line of business owner. People that are responsible for settlement at big trade houses, people that are responsible for derivatives management. These are the people that are thinking about where do we go from here. It's organizations like yours that are so powerful for us because they bring together those types of communities of users and talk about, regulatory challenges in the deployment of the data platform. They don't focus on the infrastructure. We can handle the infrastructure. That's what we do for a living. But the reach into those other discussions is really, really important for us. So I actually think the way this will play out is, rather than the technology looking for a problem, and maybe one way to think about it is, if you adopt blockchain, then you have to go change the following. I don't think that's the narrative at all. I think the narrative is the other way around. If we want to go change all these different things about our back office processes, and if that's the case, does your technology enable that to happen? I think that's the way it's playing out. And I would expect that the opportunity for, a distributed ledger platform, a data platform, as we sometimes call it, the appeal of that will become based on the enablement that it brings for people to think differently about how they can access and manage their company data as a function of the use cases that use that data within their environment.
Absolutely. And as a follow-up, I'm going to take questions now because you've got quite a few in the queue. Mark, I know, also was a former executive at a very large corporation, has asked if VMware's blockchain is able to scale while also maintaining throughput. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements of scale. It's a good question. There's a scale element to start with. Well, what type of transaction flow runs through the system, right? So it's as in the old days, we'd call it an IO flow, a transaction flow, which has to run the full gamut of consensus and application acknowledgement and ultimately storage and everything else, or the transaction has to settle. There's an element of network throughput. If you're assuming that this is running through a consensus of nodes, then you have to scale a network to run that throughput attribute. So features like batching, where you take groups of transactions and you pool them together, can make great efficient use of the network in a way that you can scale that to a very high degree. You have to have multi-threading and parallelism built in to the architecture in order to be able to handle the throughput requirements of a batch while handling the transaction challenges of the stack overall, right? That's another element of it. The number of nodes that are part of the network, maybe not the consensus nodes per se, because you can get great utility from Byzantine fault tolerance to settle a consensus with a smaller number of nodes. It's not the world of Bitcoin where you have a 51% of the population agreeing. It's a much smaller scale solution than that. But you have client nodes, your client constituents that are part of this, and that could scale to hundreds of application interfaces for clients. So you have to think about that element of scale. So there are a lot of attributes of what scale really means. I think the fundamentals for us are handling network throughput related issues, the transaction flow as it relates to what I'll call the settlement of the transaction, the permanence of the transaction, and then the node infrastructure itself. Those are probably at least 3 dimensions of scale that we pay great attention to.
Well, thanks very much for that. And I'm actually going to, if it's okay with you, Brendon, in the time that we have remaining, actually go to questions because you've got quite a few here. I'm going to try to do, and actually some of them do cover the back end questions that I had for you anyway. Okay. So it works out very well. Let's see, we've got someone who's actually listed under Hayden is asking, what sort of blockchain design patterns do you see emerging across the various enterprise use cases you've encountered so far. I'm not sure exactly what blockchain design patterns may mean, but
Yeah. Well, let me take a stab at it. It might be related to use case orientation, and well, I guess what I think about is a deployment model of how would they customize the environment for a particular use case. One of the things that we bring to the table, part of enterprise class that I probably should have focused more on, is some variability in the design. How do you deploy it? How many nodes? What regions do they go into? What data centers do they go into? How would I design this in a way where it could tolerate a data center failure or a security breach,
right.
or a geographic outage? You have flexibility in how that's done, including how do I leverage cloud? If I have a managed AWS account or a managed Azure account, can I deploy part of it there? What we see is a lot of consultation with customers around the deployment of the technology. And it is back to fundamentals of where do I put it? How do I put it? What hardware do I run this on? What infrastructure requirements are really part of that? It's funny, I made the point earlier, I grew up in the infrastructure business 30 plus years. And when I viewed this opportunity of VMware, to some extent, I sort of viewed it as, I'm going to be able to hang up my infrastructure spikes and move on to the world of fintech and application services. And what I discovered is we spend a lot of time with customers on non-functional requirements that relate to where is this deployed? How is this deployed? How is it managed? What are the scale elements? What are the cost elements of the environment I have to run it in? And those are the realities, whether you like it or not, those are the realities of the way enterprises deploy. And ultimately, it does bring IT into the discussion because these are deployed as services within environments that are typically controlled by IT, or they're run in the cloud, which is certainly a suitable option too. So that's what I would assume is, how we see that playing out a little bit. I hope I'm right.
And I think you really have underscored a very important complex problem. Existing corporations have existing systems and infrastructure. And if they're going to even think about adopting any kind of DLT or blockchain solution, number one, you're right. It is what problem are they solving for? But number two, how does that work with everything else that exists in their infrastructure layer? I am going to actually ask you what your thoughts are around, this is a more esoteric, I think, general question, but business models are going to change and have to adapt. And you've mentioned the cost cutting impetus for certain corporations to want to look at DLT because they're reorganizing and trying to be more efficient about how they're doing a process. Do you think there's ever a point where many corporations could find a actual revenue generating business model for using blockchain technology, or really it's VMware is a unique animal in this journey because it can actually launch a business utilizing and offering blockchain solutions, but most corporations are going to be users of that as opposed to generating revenue off of that, back of that.
Oh, I don't think there's any question that companies will find revenue generation opportunities, new ones, off of this platform. We're already seeing it. I mean, the customers I mentioned earlier are companies that are building new business models, new lines of business on the platform. And it leads to some interesting technology provider to customer relationships of, is this a world of revenue share more than it is a traditional, transaction model where they either license the technology or they pay a subscription model? And does that evolve into subscription plus share kind of offering? We're already seeing those discussions with every customer engagement that we have. And it's a logical way to think about how a company would undertake such a profound platform change. Imagine the selling that they're going to be doing to the CIO and the CEO. If we want to go do all these things, we're going to re-engineer all of our back office and we're going to enable lines of business. The first question I would ask is, what does that mean to our top line? How much new business can we enable? So I think that's a big, big part of what is the planning process of enterprise blockchain today. And it'll affect, folks like ourselves, it'll affect how we price our product, how we think about long-term relationships, how we think about business models ourselves. We've already had some of those discussions. I suspect we'll have a lot more.
Well, thank you for that. And actually, for those out there who think there's no revenue opportunity for enterprise blockchain, I agree with you, Brenda. I think we're at the beginning, early innings, and there are going to be ways to make money as a corporate on this industry or applications on this industry. I've got a question here from Nirav, who is asking about, well, let me read it to you. If I go back to my database days, long time ago, is it okay to compare blockchain to secure public databases? How would the evolution play out? What do we need for standards and players? And I think in blockchain, in this case, it's probably talking about more of the open source blockchains. Secure public databases. Let me think about that. Can you actually compare blockchains to secure public databases?
Yeah, I don't know about the word public there, but maybe I'll make a couple comments about that. It's a good question, Naresh. Thank you for that. I think we are often, as a function of what we build, we're often as a default compared to a database. A distributed ledger is a database. It's foundationally different, but at the end of the day, it's a ledger, and the ledger is a permanent, immutable version of a data footprint, and you can accomplish that through a variety of ways. So I do think it's pretty logical to think about all this stuff as a database. One may be centralized, one may be more distributed, one may be immutable, one may be less than mutable. I don't know what the tech term is for that, but the linkage is the same. I do think that the blockchain attributes enable use of the data that far extends beyond what a traditional centralized database foundation can provide. And I think what you'll probably see for companies that are trying to stretch that approach, that database approach, is they'll get pretty creative in smart contract logic that sits above the database that essentially recreates the notion of a blockchain environment on top of it. So I kind of feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. At some point, someone's going to build the infrastructure that allows the extension of a centralized model into more of a decentralized trust and decentralized data consistency model. I think the blockchain platforms out there provide a pretty unique and clever way of doing that. And I think there's great gains that can be experienced by leveraging that. But the association with database is something that we see a lot, and I expect to continue to see. It's the most logical way to think about it. A lot of these environments that we're doing today, including our reference customers, are built on database. The legacy systems are database-driven initiatives.
Yeah, I think in the early days, the industry, and I'm talking about blockchain folks, had a real allergic reaction to referring to blockchain as databases. I think we do need to get away from that, because at the end of the day, databases are good for certain functions. And frankly, we rely on them as the world operating and moving around data and storing and securing data. So I think we need to stop treating the word database as some sort of negative.
That's right.
I think, people are coming around to that. Some of the purists will not, but it is.
That's right.
In the last few minutes that we have with you, I would love to address a couple questions that we're getting here, which is really what I wanted to ask you to close out anyway, which is, how, as an executive, are you building a team and finding talent? Because that is a very difficult thing, especially when it is technical. You're obviously going to need some business folks, but you really also need technical people, and blockchain technical folks are quite difficult to find. And then the business people who can translate the technical into layman speak.
It's a great question. And I'm a year and a half into the challenge of how do you build a team. We've tripled the team at VMware. So I've got some scars on my back, and did this during a pandemic, which I wouldn't wish on anyone. But, to be honest, the learning for me was there are a lot of people out there that have a blockchain term on their resume of some facet. there are not a lot of people out there that understand an enterprise platform of such blockchain.
Right.
And therein lies the challenge. It's a very different world when you're building a platform to be deployed at a large Wall Street, Hong Kong, London firm who are mission critical. They run the foundational aspects of today's economy.
Right.
It's a very different set of circumstances than building a public initiative that's built on an open source platform. It is wrong to disparage either one. They're two different scenarios, and the foundational technology is common, but the way they're put together are dramatically different.
Yep.
Technology experiences and user skills, to be honest. So what we've tried to do is balance our team with know-how around blockchain and the blockchain community, good old-fashioned core enterprise infrastructure knowledge, and have had good success hiring people who understand the challenges of distributed state. At the end of the day, these are distributed compute nodes that are sharing state, and people who understand how to manage and scale those environments are really valuable people. We have quantum computing people on our team. We have people that have spent time with cryptocurrencies on our team.
Right.
We have storage and networking people on our team. And I think what we found is the balance of those skills has proven to be very effective for us. The challenge becomes domain sharing, domain knowledge sharing. We need to do even better than we're doing of making sure that we're infusing the knowledge we each have into a community of people. And by the way, this isn't just at VMware. We talked about DA, the partner, earlier on. We partner very closely with DA. The same applies to them. We view them as part of our extended team. How do we leverage what they know with what we know, and how do you bring that together? And you build an ecosystem that ultimately is foundational for a customer from a use case perspective. The other thing I'd say is we are pretty focused on financial services as a vertical. It's not the only thing we're focused on, but boy, if you're gonna pick a spot to focus on, that seems like a pretty good place to be. And as a result, we've done that. And when you're in talking to a line of business owner at a big bank, you're not having an infrastructure discussion. You're not even having a blockchain discussion. You're having a business model discussion that requires a lot of knowledge of the financial services processes and how they work and the regulatory environments and things like that. So, I think it's easy to say we're not going to build the expertise of a bank within VMware. We are a big supplier to financial services customers, so we have plenty of expertise there. But we need to partner with people that bring that expertise. And my closing comment on this, Sandra, would be this very much, we think, is a partner-driven solution stack. Any company that is setting out to build the whole thing themselves and try to control that environment, in my opinion, is doomed to fail. This is a open platform, multi-party, very broad application stack type of play.
Sorry, go ahead.
In our job at VMware, and I think I would argue any ecosystem provider in the space, needs to figure out how to define what you're really good at, and then how to go find the other pieces with people that are complementary to you. And that's what we've done with DA, and we'll do that with plenty of others. But that's the winning equation, in my opinion.
Well, I think you're going to get a lot of virtual high fives for what you've just said, because absolutely, this is a collaborative technology. And the fact that you are, working with DA and others to collaborate is a step, frankly, I think, in the very right direction. I'm going to ask you one final question as we wrap up here. You can add any final thoughts. Are you hiring? And how does one work with you if someone out there is an entrepreneur right now with the fintech or blockchain solution?
Yeah. Yes, we are hiring. We, as I mentioned, we tripled the team. We will continue to hire responsibly, of course.
Yeah.
We have budgets to abide by, but VMware's been very, very supportive of the effort, and it's just a tremendous company to be part of. It's such a unique opportunity. We're all really excited about it. For people out there that are building adjacencies or ecosystem elements or even customers, just reach out. There are blockchain, plenty of blockchain information on our site. There's contact information that's there. You can send it to me. If as last resort, you can reach me through the GBBC linkage. There's lots of ways to reach us, but we speak with everyone, and we're interested in building a large ecosystem. We're doing it in a way that's a co-innovation approach with customers. We're not looking for 350 customers next week. We're looking for the right fewer number of customers to go deep with, to really understand the environments, to make sure that we understand the success equation, and to make sure that we're enabling them for success. We have plenty of time to scale the business to hundreds of customers later. We're in the early days. We want to understand and help the customers succeed with these early initiatives that they're doing. So that would be my recommendation for reaching out, and be happy to follow up with anyone that'd be interested in talking.
Fantastic, Brendon. Appreciate your time. It is super early morning out in the West Coast. We appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing as a leader and innovator in the space. We need more Brendons out there. We'll keep trying to find them, but we really appreciate what you're doing at VMware. And to the entire VMware team, thank you. And appreciate all the folks who asked questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions, but we will forward the few over to Brendon, and hopefully we'll be able to cycle that back to the membership. Appreciate it. And I'm going to hand back over to Sophia.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Hi, Sandra. Hi, Brendon. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation today. To everyone who tuned in, we'll share a recording of this webinar as well on our YouTube channel, and we'll circulate those links. You can join us next week on the Global Leader Series for a conversation with Chris Holmes of the UK House of Lords. We'll share that registration link as well. Thank you so much, Brendon, for your time. We appreciate it, to everyone who tuned in.
Thank
Have
you.
a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.